Hey there, my name's Chris and you're watching Font of Inspiration. Today I'd like to talk about something that I feel is missing in a lot of campaign settings, both published and homebrew. What is that something? It's migration. Now you might be thinking, why should I add migration to my game? I already have an expansive history of all the kingdoms and all kinds of backstory for the setting. While it's true that you don't want to slip into world builder's disease, I think adding migration to your campaign setting could be a really good thing and an interesting thing, and here's why. Without migration, the various peoples of your world might seem a bit stale and uninteresting, as if they're never changing. Having said that, you could come up with a cool way to have a people never leave the region they've always been in. But you might want to think about the reasons behind that. Why aren't they leaving? Is it just such a good place for them? Or is there some other reason? Are they perhaps xenophobic, isolationist? Think about it. Now, people don't just stay put forever, right? So I think it adds a level of depth, realism, and lived-inness to your world if your societies have a history of moving from one place to another, instead of just being stuck in one place since the dawn of time. I mean, when does that happen in real life? So, to help you use migration more effectively in your game, let's have a look at some of the reasons behind it. So why do people migrate? Well, first off, we have this thing called the push and pull factor. The push factor is a reason why you'd want to leave your country of origin, for instance, war, poverty, famine, that sort of thing. Maybe a lack of education or jobs, a bad economy. You get the idea. The pull factor is something that attracts you in another country. Lots of jobs, a healthy environment to live in, to raise kids in, safety, low levels of crime, that sort of thing. When I was creating migration patterns for my homebrew world of Othara, these were some of the things I had to consider. Would the migration be permanent or temporary? Some places have something to offer for a limited amount of time, perhaps a natural resource that depletes over time, so there's no point in staying forever. Maybe the people move on to the next place then. Is it internal or external? Are the people moving around in a specific region, or are they coming in from another region? Are we talking about individuals, family units, larger groups? For instance, a dangerous area might attract adventurers that don't have families to protect, whereas a region with good odds for economic growth will probably attract families. It's good to also consider, is the migration voluntary or involuntary? Does region A have lots of refugees from region B because the refugees don't have any choice? Well, they're refugees, right? Maybe region B is ruled by these cruel warlords that just kill everyone that disagrees with them, and the people are powerless to fight back, so they have to leave. Involuntary, right? So some people might be seeking prosperity, while others are just trying to survive. And that could be a potential plot hook. Maybe the city your PCs live in is experiencing a sudden surge of immigrants, specifically refugees. Now, what's causing this? Cue villainous despot in region B. Another reason for involuntary migration could be famine. Maybe the crops keep dying year after year. Maybe the livestock is being poisoned by something, or maybe animals have just been hunted to extinction. Finally, a big reason for involuntary migration would be natural disaster. Think about a volcano erupting, spewing out a huge cloud of ash that just covers everything. People can't breathe, they can't see, animals die, cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. Maybe there's a dragon living close to a populated area, and its presence is just polluting everything. It's even turning the soil sour. Or maybe a colossal ancient Sumerian god rose out of the earth and just drove the people out because it just destroyed everything in its path. And in relation to that, think about villains as natural disasters and natural disasters as villains. You can change it up. It doesn't have to be a person. We should think about what motivates migration. Think about Boston. Harvard specifically. It attracts the best and brightest minds from around the world. And your world could have this kind of educational nexus as well. So there would be both external and internal migration towards this one place that's very prestigious and a hub for all things educational. Another important factor is employment, which would be economic migration. Let's think about this dangerous area that attracts a lot of adventurers. Now, it attracts them because they do the jobs that no one else will do, risking life and limb, but reaping the rewards. Another reason why an area might attract a lot of workers is perhaps a new natural resource that's just been discovered, or a new technology that's just been invented. Maybe this new technology requires a huge workforce to build it. Then there's social migration, which would be people trying to improve their lives by getting closer to their families and friends. An interesting one is political migration. Maybe a certain people is being persecuted. Maybe there's some kind of witch hunt going on. Maybe the Dragonborn or the Solarians are being ostracized for some reason. Maybe even put in camps. Who knows? Maybe people are escaping feudal rule to live in a more democratic society. Finally, I have a motivation that doesn't really pertain to the world as we know it now, but it used to in the past. Colonization. The wild frontier. Lots of work for anyone willing to do it and take big risks. And the cool thing about colonization is that it attracts both individuals and families. So you're going to have a lot of different types of people. So how do you represent these migratory patterns in your game? Well, first off, diversify. For instance, a large percentage of a population could be dwarves because, let's say stereotypically, dwarves love to mine stuff and there's a huge vein of some kind of ore next to a town. So it has attracted these dwarves from another place to work in this town. You could show the presence of other cultures through things like music, art, and food. Maybe there's a district in your town that's almost exclusively inhabited by people from a certain culture. Think about Chinatown, for example. Also, to make your migratory patterns come to life, you could trace an imaginary line from the destination country back to the country of origin from where the migrants have left. How long did it take for these migrants to reach their destination? Did some of them cut the journey short and choose to live in the areas between? Or did they make it to the end? Can you see a sort of breadcrumb pattern going back to the country of origin? Another thing to think about is, how does migration affect the cultural identities of the various peoples in your world? Is there a population in a region that's been there for generations, but still for some reason doesn't quite identify with the dominant culture around it? Maybe they're treated like second-class citizens. Maybe they just don't feel compatible with the dominant culture around them. You could make up all kinds of reasons for this. Finally, attitudes towards migration are something that we see a lot in the media these days. Are some regions more welcoming than others? Is there an underlying reason why another region might be very hesitant to welcome people from some specific area? And do some more isolationist regions perhaps try to curb immigration a bit? Or does this region let people in, but eye them with suspicion for the rest of their lives? Or you could have a region whose cultural identity is a mixture of different cultural identities, for instance, the US. Now, to wrap this up, I'm going to mention a few things that aren't migration, but they're still interesting things that you might want to drop into your world. In addition to migration, you could include nomadic movement. Now, nomadic movement, like I said, isn't considered to be migration, since it's very temporary and it's constantly moving from one place to another. You can make a culture that's entirely nomadic. What about tourism? Is tourism a prominent thing in your world? If not, why not? What attracts people to certain areas in your world? Are there some, for instance, holy sites that attract pilgrims, or something else? Now, this final one is less prominent in fantasy worlds because a lot of fantasy worlds have very primitive modes of transportation, but that doesn't have to be the case in your world. So anyway, the thing is commuting, which isn't migration, but it could be a big thing in your world. Maybe there's this huge wave of commuting between two areas that is quite visible in the daily lives of people. It could be an interesting thing to add. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you got some ideas on how to add migration into your world. If you don't want to add migration, if you think it's a bit superfluous, if you think it just makes things overly complicated, let me know in the comments why. If you do want to add migration, comment on that also. I'd really like to hear about why you use migration or why you don't use migration in your world. So, thank you very much for watching and have a good one.